If you're enjoying the stories of the past and the legends that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new episode from Echoes of Empire. The northern kingdom of Macedon, where rugged mountains rise against the wind and fields of barley sway beneath the sun, a child was born who would one day bend the world to his will. His name was Alexandros, son of Philip, heir to a land long dismissed by the great cities of Greece. Few could imagine then that this boy would become a symbol across centuries, a name that kingdoms would fear and historians would revere. But legends rarely announce themselves at birth. They grow in silence, shaped by the hands of fate and forged in the fires of ambition. Alexander entered a world balanced between chaos and possibility. Greece was a mosaic of rival city-states: Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth, and countless smaller polis battled for influence, culture, and pride. To the south lay the aging power of Persia, vast and wealthy, stretching from Egypt to the edges of India. Between these worlds stood Macedon, a kingdom that Greek writers often mocked as barbaric, uncultured, and crude. Yet beneath their insults lay ignorance. For Macedon was changing, and at the heart of that transformation stood King Philip II. Philip was no ordinary ruler. He inherited a broken kingdom, surrounded by enemies, plagued by invasion, divided by noble families who cared more for private power than the fate of their land. But Philip possessed a vision that few could see. He studied war not as a series of battles, but as a system. He reorganized the Macedonian army, gave it discipline, introduced the sarissa spear, and shaped his infantry into a formidable phalanx. He forged alliances, shattered rivals, and brought stability to a kingdom long accustomed to turmoil. In these early years, Alexander grew under the shadow of a father whose ambitions were as vast as any empire. To some, this shadow might have bred insecurity, but for Alexander it became a challenge. He sought to match his father's brilliance, to prove himself not merely Philip's son, but a leader born of destiny. Stories from his childhood reveal a boy both curious and fierce. He tamed the wild horse Bucephalus when he was only 12, not through force, but through understanding. While others saw a dangerous beast, Alexander saw a frightened animal, terrified of its own shadow. That moment, watched by nobles and soldiers alike, hinted at the insight and courage that would mark his life. Philip saw greatness in his son, and sought to cultivate it. He brought in tutors, the most famous among them Aristotle. Under his guidance, Alexander learned philosophy, ethics, politics, poetry, and science. He read Homer deeply, tracing the steps of Achilles, and felt a burning desire to mirror the heroes of old. Where Aristotle taught knowledge, Homer taught fire. The combination created something rare, a warrior guided by intellect and driven by myth. Yet education alone did not forge Alexander. War did. Even as a teenager, he accompanied Philip on campaigns. He learned to command cavalry, to ride with precision, to read terrain, and to understand the fragile balance between fear and loyalty. His father entrusted him with responsibilities far beyond his age. At 16, Alexander governed Macedon in Philip's absence, and suppressed a rebellion by storming a rebellious town, founding a new settlement upon its ashes. These experiences did more than train him, they shaped his identity. He saw himself as a descendant of heroes, a warrior guided by reason, a leader marked by fate. But he also grew aware of the tensions within his father's court. Philip had united Macedon, but unity brought its own dangers. The nobles feared losing influence. Foreign policies demanded cunning. Marriage alliances shifted power constantly. Into this political world, Alexander stepped, observant and ambitious. But beneath these accomplishments and preparations lay a truth that would soon define everything. Alexander was not yet king. Philip still ruled, and Philip's ambitions grew larger each year. He conquered Greece piece by piece, winning battles, forming alliances, and finally defeating the combined forces of Athens and Thebes at Chaeronea. Alexander fought in that battle and commanded the companion cavalry, proving both bravery and skill. Yet even as father and son stood victorious, a new tension grew. Philip prepared to invade Persia. He envisioned himself leading the Greek world, into a new era of conquest. Some sources claim Alexander feared he would not inherit enough achievements to equal his father. Others claim jealousy, frustration, or impatience. Whether these stories hold truth or reflect later myth, one thing is certain: Alexander's rise was bound to be forged, not alongside Philip, but after him. The moment that would change everything came swiftly and without warning. Philip was assassinated at Agai during a festival, killed by one of his own bodyguards. The motivations remain debated even today: personal grievance, political conspiracy, foreign interference, or family intrigue. Whatever the cause, the result was clear. A great king fell, and into the sudden void stepped Alexander. What follows next in this story is not merely the beginning of a reign, it is the forging of a legend. Macedon would challenge him, Greece would test him, enemies would attempt to crush him before he even secured the throne. But Alexander, shaped by Philip, guided by vision, and supported by loyal commanders, would rise through every obstacle. With Philip's death, the world turned its eyes to a young man of 20. Some waited for him to fail. Others whispered that Macedon would fracture. Rivals sharpened their blades. Cities prepared to rebel. Enemies saw opportunity. But Alexander did not hesitate. And so begins the true ascent of Alexander the Great. The moment Philip fell, Macedon stood on the edge of chaos. Kingship in this land did not pass smoothly through ceremony or gentle acceptance. It passed through steel. A king was not declared by birth alone. He was declared by the army, the nobles, and the silent approval of allies who could become enemies with a single gesture. When the news spread that Philip had been struck down, shock rippled across the court. Grief turned quickly into calculation. Every man with ambition felt opportunity stir within him. Alexander acted before that opportunity could become a threat. He raced to the royal palace. He secured the treasury. He took control of the cavalry. He ensured the loyalty of the royal guard. He reached out to those who supported his father and reminded them that loyalty to Philip meant loyalty to his son. He spoke with authority, with calm force, and with the conviction of someone who understood that hesitation meant death. Within hours, the foundations of his rule began to settle, but not everyone accepted him. It was known that Philip had other children. It was whispered that rival claimants would rise. Noble families who disliked Olympias, Alexander's mother, whispered louder. Foreign envoys waited to see if Alexandros, barely 20 years old, could hold a kingdom that had taken Philip decades to rebuild. Alexander answered their doubts with precision. Those who posed a threat were removed. Some were exiled. Some were killed. Some bent the knee. It was brutal, but in Macedon brutality was the language of survival. The nobles understood this. They had seen it under Philip. They respected strength. Alexander demonstrated it with discipline, not cruelty. He sought no needless bloodshed. He simply ensured that those who might fracture the kingdom posed no danger. With the domestic threats subdued, Alexander turned to the heart of Macedonian power, the army. These soldiers had marched with Philip for decades. They had fought Greeks, Thracians, Illyrians, and barbarians. They did not follow a crown. They followed the man who commanded their respect. Alexander stepped before them and spoke with the confidence of someone who had fought beside them at Chaeronea. He reminded them of his victories. He honored his father. He proclaimed his intent not only to maintain Macedonian greatness, but to expand it. The soldiers, hardened by war and loyal to the legacy of Philip, raised their spears and declared him king. The throne was his. But the world beyond Macedon did not wait. To the north, the Triballi and other tribes saw a young king and sensed weakness. To the west, the Illyrians prepared for revolt. To the south, Greece burned with possibility. Athens and Thebes remembered the glory of independence. They believed Macedon would crumble under a new ruler. They believed this was their chance to reclaim the freedom Philip had taken. Alexander knew this would happen. The moment he secured his throne, he rode north with speed and fury. He defeated the Triballi in battle, drove the Illyrians into the mountains, and crushed revolts before they ignited. He did this not only to secure Macedon, but to send a message. The king was not a boy. The kingdom was not weak. The empire Philip had built would not collapse under his son. With the north secured, Alexander turned his gaze south toward Greece. The Greek city-states watched with growing awareness. The boy king had defeated northern tribes with a swiftness no one expected. He had shown the same brutal efficiency Philip once commanded, yet the Greek cities still believed rebellion was possible. Freedom, or the idea of freedom, mattered more to them than reason. In Athens, speeches filled the air. Demosthenes, long a critic of Macedonia, urged the people to rise. He spoke of liberty. He spoke of opportunity. He spoke of a chance to undo the shame of Chaeronea. But words alone were not enough. Athens waited for Thebes. Thebes held the key. If Thebes rose, Greece could rise with it. Thebes had once dominated Greece. Its warriors had defeated Sparta. Its generals, like Epaminondas, were legends. But Thebes had fallen under Macedonian control. Pride still lived there. Anger still simmered. When a rumor spread that Alexander had been killed in the north, Thebes believed the time to act had come. The rumor was false. Alexander was very much alive. He had not fallen in the north. He had crushed the rebellion. And the moment he learned what Thebes had done, he rode south with a speed that stunned the ancient world. Barely had Thebes declared independence, when Macedonian scouts appeared near its borders. The Thebans were shocked. They had expected weeks, perhaps months before Macedon could react. Instead, Alexander stood before their walls in days. He marched nearly 200 miles in little more than a week, a feat of endurance and coordination unmatched in Greek memory. Thebes now faced a king they had underestimated. They sent messages to Athens. They pleaded for support. They waited for allies. None came in time. Alexander surrounded the city. The air grew heavy with dread. The Thebans prepared for battle. They believed their walls were strong. They believed their fighters were brave. They believed their cause was noble. Alexander did not intend to negotiate. He demanded their surrender. The Thebans refused. They fought fiercely, as the Greeks always had. But Macedon fought as a unified force. They advanced with discipline. They broke through the gates. They poured into the city with cold precision. What happened next would change Greece forever. But that moment belongs to the next part of the story. The sun rose over Thebes on the morning that would seal its fate. Its ancient walls cast long shadows across the land. Within them lived a proud people, heirs to legends and victors of once mighty Sparta. Thebes had stood at the center of Greek history for centuries. Yet all its history, all its pride, would soon collide with the relentless force marching toward its gates. Alexander observed the city from a ridge. Thebes sat in the rolling Boeotian plain, its defenses strong, its people resolute. They had chosen rebellion. Believing Macedon was weakened, they had believed the young king dead. Now they faced the truth. Alexander was alive, undefeated, and standing at their doorstep. The Thebans attempted to rally. Their leaders urged unity. They reminded the citizens of their past victories. They invoked the memory of Epaminondas and the sacred band. But courage alone could not mask the growing weight of fear. The Macedonian army was unlike that of other Greek states. It moved with purpose. It fought as a single organism. Its phalanx, cavalry and light troops, were not separate tools but parts of a unified design, shaped over the years by Philip and inherited by Alexander. Still, Thebes refused to surrender. They sent out small forces to skirmish with Macedonian scouts. They tried to test the edges of Alexander's formation. They fought with the desperation of a city trying to reclaim its past. But Alexander was not a leader who allowed rebellion to simmer. He had inherited Philip's ambition and sharpened it with his own youthful intensity. He needed Greece united behind him, not fractured by defiance. He prepared his forces. The phalanx formed its long line, shields interlocked, sarissas angled forward like a living forest of spearheads. The companion cavalry stood ready under the command of men Alexander trusted. Light troops, archers, and slingers moved into position. The king himself rode Bucephalus, watching, judging the battlefield, calculating the moment of assault. When the signal came, Macedon advanced. The clash was immediate and violent. The Thebans fought with determination. They held the gates. They launched counterattacks. The sacred band, Thebes' elite warriors, stood firm in the heart of the fighting, but discipline and coordination favored Macedon. Alexander's soldiers pushed through the outer defenses. Walls were scaled. Gates were forced open. The Macedonian phalanx, once entrenched in the streets, advanced with measured precision, forcing Theban fighters back step by step. Alexander did not hesitate. He seized the moment, riding with his cavalry to exploit a breach. The sight of the king charging into battle ignited the Macedonian troops. They pressed harder. The Theban lines wavered. Panic spread, street by street. The city fell under Macedonian control. Inside the chaos, the sacred band of Thebes stood their ground. They fought not for survival, but for honor. Their discipline held even as the rest of the city fell apart. But courage cannot defy overwhelming force forever. Surrounded, they refused to yield. Alexander respected them, for he understood bravery when he saw it. Yet he could not spare them. Not in this battle, not in this moment. They fell where they stood, their pride unbroken. By afternoon, the fighting was over. Thebes lay defeated. Now came the decision that would define Alexander's early reign. Greek cities watched. They needed to understand the price of rebellion. Macedon needed unity before marching east. Yet Thebes was not just any city. It was ancient, respected, and once powerful. Its fate required careful thought. Alexander consulted his allies, especially the Corinthian League. Their verdict was harsh. Thebes must be destroyed to prevent further defiance. And Alexander, though still young, understood the politics of fear and example. Thebes was condemned. Over the following days, Macedonian soldiers tore down the walls. Houses were leveled. Streets became ruins. The population was scattered. Many were sold into slavery. The city that had once humbled Sparta, the city of Epaminondas, was erased from the map. Only temples and the home of the poet Pindar were spared. A gesture of respect for the gods and Greek culture. News of Thebes' destruction spread like wildfire across Greece. Athens trembled. Corinth fell silent. Sparta watched with cold calculation. None dared challenge Alexander now. The young king had delivered a message with absolute clarity. Macedon would not be questioned. Unity would not be negotiated. Rebellion would be crushed swiftly and without hesitation. And so the Greek world submitted. Envoys from Athens came to negotiate peace. They feared the same fate as Thebes. But Alexander, unlike the kings of old, knew when to show mercy. Athens was spared, not because it was strong, but because it was valuable. Its thinkers, playwrights and philosophers held prestige among the Greeks. Alexander had been taught by Aristotle. He respected the intellectual heart of Greece. He imposed terms, but he did not destroy the city. Corinth reaffirmed its loyalty. Arcadia, Elis, Achaia, Phocis, and countless smaller states pledged obedience. Greece was united not by negotiation, but by the force of one man's will. Alexander had achieved what centuries of warfare among the Greek city-states had failed to accomplish. He had created unity out of division. But unity was not his ultimate goal. It was merely the beginning. While Greece settled under Macedonian rule, Alexander looked east. Beyond the Aegean Sea lay the Persian Empire, vast and wealthy, stretching from the Mediterranean to the valleys of India. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen. It had humbled Athens. It had clashed with Greece for generations. To many Greeks, Persia was a symbol of oppression. To Alexander, it was a path to immortality. Philip had dreamed of invading Persia. His dream died with him. Alexander intended to revive it, but not merely to complete his father's vision. He sought something far greater. He sought to surpass every hero he had read, every king he had studied, and every myth he had grown up admiring. He would march into Persia not as a Greek avenger, but as a conqueror seeking glory, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Yet to do that, he needed to consolidate the Greek world completely. and one threat still lingered. Thebes was destroyed, but memory remained. Other cities watched carefully. Alexander needed to demonstrate not only strength but readiness. He needed Greece to see him as their leader, not merely Macedonia's king. So he called for the assembly of the League of Corinth. The Greek cities gathered. They confirmed him as the hegemon, the supreme general of a united Greek force. This position granted him both legitimacy and authority, allowing him to command Greek soldiers in a campaign against Persia. The cities agreed to send troops, provisions and resources. They pledged loyalty to the coming war. Alexander had achieved what his father dreamed. He stood now as the leader, not only of Macedon, but of Greece itself. The destruction of Thebes had not been an act of cruelty alone. It had been a declaration. It showed that rebellion would cost everything. It showed that unity would stand. It showed that the young king understood the brutal logic of the ancient world. And now that Greece was united, the campaign to conquer Persia could begin. But that story belongs to the final part of this rise. When the smoke of Thebes cleared, and the last stones of its walls lay shattered upon the earth, a silence settled over Greece. Cities that had once argued fiercely over every political detail now whispered in the shadow of a single name: Alexander, the king who had risen too quickly, the king who moved too fast for the world to predict, the king who brought with him the fire of ambition that could not be contained by borders or by caution. Thebes was gone, erased not by time but by consequence, and its fall sent a shock through every polis from the Peloponnese to the shores of Ionia. For centuries, the Greek world had lived in a cycle of independence, rivalry, and war. Athens and Sparta, Sparta and Thebes, Corinth and Athens, endless conflict, endless pride, endless struggle for dominance. But Alexander had done what no other leader could. He had ended the cycle, not through diplomacy, not through moral appeal, but through the ruthless certainty of action. The destruction of Thebes was not a moment of cruelty. It was a statement of inevitability. It announced that Greece would no longer be a land of competing city-states. It would be a spear pointed eastward. With Greece united under the League of Corinth, Alexander began to prepare for the greatest expedition the ancient world had ever witnessed: the invasion of Persia. A dream his father had nurtured for years. But unlike Philip, whose ambitions were tempered by age and strategy, Alexander saw the campaign not only as a political goal but as a path to transcendence. In his mind, Persia was not simply an empire to be defeated, it was the stage upon which his destiny would unfold. He spent months securing his borders. Macedon needed stability before the army could march. Garrisons were placed in key cities. Loyal generals were assigned to hold important positions. Supplies were gathered, stored, and organized. Grain, wine, weapons, armor, and gold. Every piece of the coming war machine needed to be in perfect order. At the same time, Alexander nurtured the political foundation of his authority. He honored the League of Corinth, reaffirmed its structure, and promised that the Greek cities would benefit from Persia's wealth. He allowed Athens to maintain cultural prestige. He let Sparta remain untouched, knowing that forcing their participation would cost more than it was worth. The Greek world no longer needed fear, it needed purpose. But Alexander's preparations did not end with politics. He looked to the north once again, for tribes beyond the Danube always waited for moments of distraction. He marched against the Getae and the Triboli, ensuring that his flank would remain secure. Each victory reinforced the image of a king chosen by the gods. His soldiers believed in him, his generals trusted him, and the world began to sense that something extraordinary was emerging from Macedon. During this time, Alexander spent nights studying old campaigns. He read accounts of Persian kings. He learned the routes, the cities, the rivers, the terrain. He examined the weaknesses in the vast empire that stretched beyond the Aegean. Persia was rich, yes, but it was also divided. Its satraps held too much local power. Its throne was contested. Its armies were large, but not unified. Alexander understood something essential: empires do not fall to force alone. They fall when someone strikes at their fractures, and Alexander intended to strike with precision. In the spring of 334 BCE, the preparations were complete. The Macedonian army, strengthened by Greek allies, stood ready: 30,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, engineers, logisticians, sailors, and artisans, a force unlike anything Greece had ever sent beyond its shores. Alexander marched them to the port of Pella. The ships waited. The sea shimmered under the sun. The moment felt like a hinge in history. Before boarding, Alexander performed a ritual. He sailed to the temple of Athena on the island of Samothrace. He prayed to the gods of his ancestors. He invoked Zeus and Heracles. He offered sacrifices for good fortune. He knew that symbols mattered as much as strategy in the ancient world. Soldiers needed belief, and Alexander intended to give them belief not just in victory, but in destiny. From Samothrace, he sailed to the shores of Asia Minor. When his foot touched the earth of Persia's western frontier, he paused. Stories say he cast a spear into the land, claiming Asia as a gift from the gods. Others say he simply stood in silence, absorbing the moment. Both versions carry truth. For Alexander, this was not merely the beginning of a campaign, it was the beginning of an empire. Yet even as he looked eastward, the echoes of Thebes still lingered behind him. The destruction of the city had not only cowed Greece, it had forged Alexander's reputation in fire. The world now understood that he would not hesitate, that he would not falter, that he believed utterly in the destiny laid before him. Thebes had been a warning to Greece. Persia would become the proving ground of his ambition. But this story of conquest, of battles like Issus, Gaugamela, and Hydaspes, lies beyond the scope of this rise. We end here, at the threshold between two worlds. Behind Alexander lies a Greece finally united. Before him lies the vast empire of Persia, waiting like a challenge whispered by fate. Alexander the Great had risen, not through inheritance, not through chance, but through action, through resolve, through the iron certainty that destiny favors the bold. The world would never be the same again. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new episode from Echoes of Empire.